So this panel, Philanthropy 3.0, is to talk about some of the trends we see in modern philanthropy. We have representatives here of people, Dr. Burda, who really, I think, was one of the first major philanthropists in Germany in the last 25 years, has done some quite remarkable pioneering things, which we'll hear a little bit about. But also representing three sort of people who are closely involved in philanthropy of the next generation, and also the technology generation. So Peter Thiel, sort of co-founder of PayPal and the part of the Founders Fund. Naveen Jain, who's going to speak for a few moments actually at the beginning about philanthropy as in a business context and how you can apply business practices to modern philanthropy. Dr. Burda, obviously, and Tony, who we just heard from. So I think I might just ask Naveen to kick off by speaking for a few minutes about how to import some of the business practices and practices in Silicon Valley elsewhere into philanthropy, and then we'll have a discussion.
Good. So, good morning, and I'm here to tell you about what philanthropy is and what philanthropy is not. Philanthropy is not about giving money. It should be about solving a problem, which is what I believe the entrepreneurs do. So in my view of the world, there are really three types of people in this world. People who can see the problem, and since all of us are really good at that, let's call them human beings. Some of us are really good at also finding the solution to those problems, and those are the visionaries. And there are only one type of people in this world who go out and do something about it and solve these problems, and those are the people we call them entrepreneurs. So now think about it. Why is it that we have spent or we've given away $1 trillion worth of money and we still have all the major grant challenges in the world? Whether you're looking at education, billion people with no education, the clean water, the healthcare. Why is it these problems are not getting solved? And my hypothesis is because nobody is looking at them from an entrepreneurial perspective. So how do you look at the problem from an entrepreneurial perspective? It's really, really simple. Think like an entrepreneur. So what's the first thing that an entrepreneur asks themselves when they start a business? How big is my market? You don't go out and tell an entrepreneur your market size is 100 people or 1,000 people and they get excited about that. But guess what happens? Philanthropists do it all the time. I went to this village in this country, and boy, they didn't have any school, so I'm going to build a school. Market size of 100 people. Well, they didn't have a hospital, so I built a hospital and called it a John Hopkins Hospital. Got it. Another 1,000 people impacted. Well, how do you scale that to 1 billion people? You have to convert every single problem that looks like an infrastructure problem into an information gap problem. And if you can solve the information gap, you solve the problem. So if you're thinking about education, do you really need to build a school to solve education? Or can you come up with a neuroscience principle? Can you build a system or a software that is more effective than a private tutor and more addictive than a video game? And if you could do that, that can scale to 1 billion people. The second thing you entrepreneurs ask themselves is, God forbid, if I'm successful, can I scale it? So it's okay to test the thing on a small market called alpha or beta. The minute it is successful, if it can't scale, don't bother doing. Philanthropists do it all the time. They go out with a great concept, they become successful in their one particular area, and they say, well, I can't do anything. I need $1 billion for that, or I need $100 billion for that. I can't do that. So the good ideas die. So philanthropists are the great people where the good ideas go to die. The third thing that happens is when you start a company, you find people who are the smartest people who you can find who can solve your problem. That's not what philanthropists do. When you are starting a project, you say, who is available? You go to your neighbor, you say, John, you're kind of retired. I'm doing some work in Africa. Any interest? Sure, I'll do it. John has no idea what to do, but John is available. Entrepreneurs don't go out with the people who are available. They go and find the people they need. And the last thing is, you have to make it sustainable. You cannot start a philanthropic work that's non-sustainable. And this, I'm going to give you a small anecdotal story about how to think like an entrepreneur. About 3 months ago, a great woman came to me and said, I have been providing a homeless shelter to women, and I have been doing a great job, and I've been very successful. I need to expand the shelter program so I can get more women there. And I said, let's assume I'm going to give you the money to get that thing going. I hope you're going to use the money wisely. She said, absolutely, we are going to grow. And I said, then what? You're going to come back and ask for more money. She said, yes, that's how it works. And I said, that's not how philanthropy should work. I said, have you thought about what is your product and who is your customer, just like an entrepreneur does? She said, what do you mean by that? And I said, what's your product that you're selling and who's buying it? She thought for 30 seconds. She said, my product is my shelter and my customers are my women. And I said, that's a bad answer because your customer is not paying for your product. She said, what would you do? And I said, it's really simple. Your women who are coming to the shelter are your product and local businesses are your customer. What if you go to the local businesses that I have women who are willing to work part-time and they will show up to work because if they don't show up to work, they won't be at my shelter tomorrow. That means now you can use these part-time workers for 2 hours, 4 hours, or 8 hours at the same wage that you pay anybody else. Imagine if you can do that. The more women who want to come to the shelter, more businesses who can use them, and now you have a self-sustainable operation. Even the philanthropic work, which is empathy, becomes a self-sustainable operation. And that's how you think like an entrepreneur. Everything has to be scalable and it has to be sustainable. As an entrepreneur, you should never, ever be ashamed of saying, I am profitable and I make money. The biggest, I think, disadvantage or the biggest disservice that we have done to philanthropy is creating a concept of social entrepreneur. There is no such thing as social entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur, and somebody who can solve the problem is a great entrepreneur. And if you want to create $1 billion company, let me tell you, it's really, really simple. Solve a $10 billion problem. You don't go out and create $1 billion company by solving $1 million problem. So, Peter.
So just before we turn to Peter, I think perhaps Dr. Burda just wants to give a couple of moments on having gone through this process, probably a quarter of a century ago, and created a foundation that has become very significant in Germany. But do you want to just say for a few moments about what inspired you to create it and how you evolved it, and then we'll turn back to Peter.
I just want to emphasize a little bit about the context in which this Philanthropy 3.0 must be seen. Sociologically, what you see on the stage, you find a new class of young, rich, at least millionaire, but most of all billionaires. That means you had never in history, you had billionaire, billionaire, billionaire. You never had 3 billionaires under 40 years. I mean, this is sociological, a total new phenomena, which has to do with the digital revolution. And the digital revolution is the revolution not of my generation. We keep our eyes watching it, but of the now 35, 40 years, all you too. They have brilliant eyes. They have been much faster in understanding the patterns to success. And so they are privileged to have done a lot of money, but they don't go for shipping or golfing or just drinking or girls. There couldn't be no better examples than what you have done in Las Vegas. I mean, honestly, when I heard that you invest such a lot of money in Las Vegas, I had no idea about this incredible utopia you realized, and you all could see this is a good example for future cities. That means these new generation of digital entrepreneurs and we could add Sergey Brin, Larry Page, we can add 50, 100 good examples, especially in California, who came up with incredible new ideas that change society, the way we live, the way we think. And this is incredible. And it has to do with another item, this is collaboration. The traditional German Stiftungsmodell means tue Gutes, aber bitte rede nicht darüber. It's a very Protestant ethic. That means if you give money for good things as a donor, but don't talk about it. And this is the opposite. You must talk about it because otherwise you cannot get collaboration. If we do something in Africa and we don't cope with the Gates Foundation, so it's nothing. Here is Christa Ma, who is one of the best networker I have seen for our special case. I mean, what you have done with collaboration, changed laws and changed politics. So this is, I think that's so important. And there you see collaboration works with the internet. The internet, with 1 or 4 clicks, you know who is on the web, you know who can help you. And the last new thing is you can follow it. Even with microfunding, you can follow. If you give €5 or little money, you can see how the network grows and how you can really achieve good things. So, Peter, you have some thoughts about education.
Yes, well, let's see. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Actually, just maybe say a little bit generally, picking up on the two themes that were the entrepreneur theme and sort of how to think about philanthropy in the 21st century. You know, I actually, this always feels like a terrible forum to say this, but I actually do think there's something to be said for, you know, occasionally you want to do philanthropy and tell people about it and encourage other people to work with you or to follow you. But I also think there are times when it is good to do things without telling people, or that you know, and what we always have to come back to, whether you talk about it or do not talk about it, is are you actually doing something that makes the world a better place? And I think the question I would pose is the same one that I think one has to ask as an entrepreneur. It is, you know, if I did not build this company, would this problem be solved? And if you have a business that 100 other people are ready to build anyway, it's probably not very valuable. And the most valuable businesses are the ones that nobody else is working on. And in a very similar way, I think the most important philanthropic projects are the ones that are not otherwise going to be funded, that are projects that cannot be funded on a for-profit side. So these are problems that maybe have a public good aspect to them and that therefore cannot profitably solved. And they're ones for which there is no government funding because for some reason they're not sufficiently popular, or in a democracy or representative government you don't get enough votes for them. And so I think that great philanthropy, like great entrepreneurship, has this in common, that you work on things that are very outside of the consensus when you start. And I think one has to always try to maintain a certain critical self-awareness on why you are doing it. If you are doing it because it's something that's social or it's a way to be cool, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that may not be the way that you really move the dial in our world. And I think the way you really move the dial is to do things that otherwise would not be getting done. And that certainly is the prism through which I've looked at all the different philanthropy efforts I've been involved in. It's always, if this does not happen, if we don't do this, they typically don't get done. Sometimes we'd like them to be a little bit more popular because then maybe we could get other people to fund them and we wouldn't have to fund them all, you know, internally. But I do think that that's sort of an important baseline to always keep in mind. Now, when we come to this question of education and the education system, there's a great deal about it that seems sort of increasingly off. It's a system that requires more and more input. It's not clear the outputs are growing. In the United States, the costs of college education after inflation have gone up 400% since 1980. It's gone up faster than anything else, faster than healthcare, faster than energy prices, faster than housing costs. The model is still very much stuck in the 19th century. Schools still look like they're from the 19th century. And if you define technology as doing more with less, you get more done with the same or fewer resources. Education is somehow almost the opposite of technology, where we're in a sense doing the same or maybe even less with more and more resources. And so it is sort of an incredible anti-technological force in our society if you look at how it actually works. And of course, it varies by country, but in the United States, you have this problem of increasing student debt. The somewhat harsh way I've described it is that you have about $1 trillion of student debt, and what it has basically gone to pay for is $1 trillion worth of lies about how great the education is the people got. And instead you see more and more people who are graduating from college, and it's not really clear what they can do. So I think there's a tremendous need to rethink education. When I first approached the question of education, higher education, back in 2007, the idea was to somehow, put more money into universities, maybe even start a new university, do things very differently. And I had one of the people from my foundation look at all the different universities that had been started in the world in the last 100 years. And there have been a few successes. Most of them cost enormous amount of money. Not that much good came out of it. And I sort of became convinced as a result of this process, the consensus of putting more money into education was actually the wrong idea. There was probably way too much allocated towards existing structures, and that perhaps the correct thing would be to sort of diversify what some of the most talented people in our society did, and look at letting people pursue somewhat different trajectories. And the program we came up with about 2.5 years ago was a program to identify 20 very talented students aged 20 and younger to stop out of college for 2 years and work on some scientific or technological project that otherwise would not be getting done. And the idea was that we're in a society where all of the talented people get tracked the exact same way. If you're a person of average abilities, there are many different things you can do. You can maybe go to a community college, you can go to a vocational school, there's sort of a lot of different things. If you're a super talented person, it's expected you go to a top university and get a degree learning pretty much the same thing as all the top talented people. So there's this incredible consensus, herd-like thinking around how education is supposed to look. And we basically decided to fund the very contrarian, very unpopular seeming alternative. And it was actually surprising how many people had deep concerns about it. So, at the time I thought it was just this very eccentric program that would not be supported in any way. But it somehow hit quite sort of a major discussion point in our society, which is that a lot of people have been wondering about whether the consensus on education is right. And this was an important debate for us to start having. And I don't claim that nobody should go to college or that everybody should stop out of school, but I do think in education and all these other areas, we need to try to widen the range of things that people think about doing.
I think one of the other characteristics of Peter, Naveen, and Tony, as Dr. Burda was saying to us a little earlier, is that these are philanthropists, if you can use that term, in the prime of their business careers. It used to be the case that philanthropy was a second career or a third career. You would start after the success of your business. And in the case of people like Bill Gates, mostly it has been. But since everyone on stage, and Dr. Burda, in fact, when he started his foundation, were in the prime of their careers, I think it's interesting to see what inspired them to start at that particular time, and also how they coexist and apply those principles to things. Tony, I think, obviously is probably spending the most amount of time, I think, of anyone here on the project we just heard about in downtown Las Vegas. And how was it that you first were compelled to start that?
I guess I don't really think of it as philanthropy. It's more just, one of my favorite quotes is, a great brand is a story that never stops unfolding. And I think similar type of mentality for just thinking about what's next for a business or just what one does in life. And so, research has actually shown that companies that have a higher purpose actually outperform their peers in the long run. And so you might view it as social entrepreneurship or philanthropy, but I actually just view it as it's a great long-term business strategy.
And Naveen, you've obviously been spending time with on board of X Prize, and also I think along with Peter, as a big supporter and fan of Singularity. And so what was it that first drew you in to both those courses?
Well, I think, as I always keep thinking that there are really the grand challenges, but if you apply the innovation and entrepreneurship, you can solve many of these problems. My hats off to Peter for at least bringing the education to the forefront. The reason that Peter is doing what he's doing is because our current education system is completely broken. But while Peter is doing to bring people outside the education system and utilizing their skill for fundamentally the things that they can be productive, I think we can still fix the education system by disrupting it, not by incrementally evolving it. So what if you are able to do something where our education system was designed for an industrial era and is designed like a manufacturing process. It was designed for the time where you could learn a certain skill and use it for the rest of your life. In today's economy, where whatever you learn becomes obsolete in the next 5 to 10 years, you really have to learn, and you have to learn to do abstract reasoning. And there are ways you can teach that system where you're essentially not teaching the facts, but are teaching the kids how to learn, how to do the abstract thinking, how to do the logical things. And the things like the Dean Ornish is talking about, it's really the lifestyle change. It's not more medicine. So I'm really thankful, despite what anybody else says, to bring the education system thing to the forefront, Peter. I think that's a wonderful thing in what you're doing. But I think there are complementary programs we could come up with, which essentially also disrupts. We have to come up with a different way of doing things. So if you are a problem, you're talking about energy. Can you create energy from synthetic biology? Can you create bacteria that essentially convert the salt water into a fossil fuel? Can you, if you're solving about healthcare, can you develop sensors that can diagnose the most common diseases, so you don't need a doctor, you can create a digital doctor. You can think about all of these problems that are solvable today that were not solvable before. You have to apply the innovation and entrepreneurship. And you have to, like us, we are an entrepreneur and will never retire. To me, the retirement is when you do things you enjoy doing. So if you're not doing what you're doing, then you shouldn't be doing it. And if you're doing what you're doing, then you're already retired. Thank you.
As we only have a few seconds, a kind of Schlusswort, how we came from Philanthropy 3.0 to the education. If you think about the last 2 days, you'll see there haven't been any really interesting European example. All these boys and girls are coming mostly from California. In California, San Francisco. I mean, it's Stanford, it's Palo Alto, if you see. And so what Peter did for education, I think when I listen to especially our German debate, we have very good schools, we have good universities, but we don't achieve this combination of business and algorithm and writing of software. I don't know why, but we in France the same, Italy is the same. Europe is so much behind all these innovations. So what we have to do is to look for new examples where we can combine. We have brilliant engineers, but they leave universities, sometimes they are jobless. Can you imagine someone leaving Harvard or Stanford being jobless in your country? They go to Facebook. Where are the examples here? So this is something we have to do. My company is engaged in 2 projects, one here in Munich and the other one in Karlsruhe, which is the internet city of Germany with 35,000 people working in software. But for me, it's so clear, changing a media company like mine, if you don't understand the new technology, as you have to understand it 100 years ago for printing, you are lost. And what we need in Germany is that the young people really enter software writing, enter coding. So, thank you very much.
So I think just one last question for Peter, just before we finish off, is scalability. So, you know, the 20 under 20 program has been terrifically successful, and you've run it now for 2 years. I think this is your 3rd year. But given the education has such a stranglehold by government, either in terms of direct funding or in terms of influence in policy, how do you ultimately take what you've done and the disruption that you've articulated, and how do you scale that both in the US and hopefully other people around the world will be able to follow in your example?
I don't have a great answer to that question, actually. But I do think that there is room for setting an example and people starting new things. So it's like, how do you scale entrepreneurship? And I think, or you know, how would you start entrepreneurship in Germany? If you ask that as a question, and you mentored a few entrepreneurs in Germany, and you said, well, that's not going to scale. The way I think it scales is by setting an example, a role model, other people copy it, and you gradually change things that way.
Well, perhaps after this year in this panel, Dr. Burda will instigate a program in Germany to do so. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bravo.